they'll be able to see us and hear us, as a matter of fact.
As they log in?
Yeah. Yeah. For the next 10 minutes, I'm going to start the countdown clock in a moment. And
thank you for letting me know this.
Yeah. They'll mostly see the countdown clock, but they'll also see two tiny little windows with each of us, and they will hear our audio.
Yeah, I've actually know this because I've watched the show many times. So I'm not surprised. Yeah, it's a terribly good show, as you must know. I mean, you've been doing it for a long time, and I consider you one of the best interviewers. Is this better, by the way, in terms of light?
It's good. Mm-hmm.
I made it a little warmer.
Yeah. Yeah, your face has more color. Here we go. Time to turn on the clock. There. So all we have to do now. So once the clock starts, all of the people who are subscribers get notification that we're live. So that gives them basically 10 minutes to log in.
Well, I hope some of them do. I am not the most popular guest in the world.
Oh, well, our videos do quite well on New Thinking Aloud.
On New Thinking Aloud, I would do better, yeah. But mostly at these UFO conferences and stuff I go to, and I'm the last man on the list because I don't tell fascinating and scary folk tales. Not really. I tell the truth, which nobody likes to hear, which is that we don't know what this is.
Yeah.
To me, that makes it much more interesting. I think if I knew what it was, it wouldn't be so interesting. Whatever it is, it's giving us a marvelous chance to explore it.
Mm-hmm.
That should be taken advantage of instead of jumping to conclusions that are unsubstantiated by any basis in available factual evidence.
Well, a couple of weeks ago, we had Raymond Moody on, and he's a big advocate of the ancient Greek philosopher Pyrrho.
Is he? I did not know that about him.
Yeah.
Oh my, I want to have him on my show because that's fascinating. Give me some idea of just a general thought about the discussion.
Well, Pyrrho, you may know, was the founder of the movement of skeptics in philosophy.
Right.
And he, I think he came a few hundred years after Aristotle, and he basically, the way Raymond explained it, he was a critic of Aristotle because Aristotle felt he knew so much. And Pyrrho basically was saying that a true skeptic is someone who admits he doesn't know.
Yes. Well, that makes me a skeptic then, I suppose.
Right. But the people today who call themselves skeptics aren't really skeptics at all. They're scoffers.
Denial is not skepticism.
Right.
It's not at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had some conversations with Carl Sagan about that whole issue. And oddly enough, he was effectively raised by a dear friends, Faith and John Hubley, who have passed on themselves now, of course, and that they were animators, and they were wonderful people. As far left as you could go without being right. They were friends of that fellow who was so involved in the communist scandals. I've forgotten his name. I'm sorry to say.
Lamar, Corliss Lamont, is that the guy?
No. He was involved in the spy scandals. He was considered the spy by many people. in any case, he was their friend, and he probably actually was a spy. I don't think it was wrong,
Hmm.
but many people in the 30s didn't have the same attitude towards Stalin that evolved later, nor did anyone understand what he was as a monster.
Yeah.
So they were kind of dupes. But in any case, the Hubleys were not. They were lovely people, and Faith and Carl were very close.
Mm.
And I talked to Carl about this whole business a number of times and how to think about it. And he publicly appeared to be a kind of a denier, but his actual approach was much more sophisticated than that.
Yeah.
It just that it didn't come across as that any more than mine comes across as what it is, because I'm the poster boy for alien abduction, and I've never said I was abducted by aliens in my entire life. And in the same way, Sagan was the poster boy for absolute denial, but he didn't. He was very open, in my opinion.
In fact, as I recall in his last book, he made a point of saying that we should look very seriously at the reincarnation research of Ian Stevenson.
Absolutely, because he was a person who, he said once, he said, the place I stop is where I want to believe. And then I began to look and try to see why.
Mm.
And that's a very valid approach, I think.
Yeah.
But
Well,
I don't think you can be dismissive of the stories of alien abduction. I mean, I can't be dismissive of my own story. My God, I suffered for 20 years from the injuries
yeah.
that I received that night. So
Have they healed up at this point?
I haven't had pain from them since about 2013.
Mm.
Yeah, so I would say so. I can look back in I would go to the doctor the to have the pain treated from the scarring from time to time, and I still have some of the medications I was given, but I haven't used them in a long time.
Mm.
But that's a real event, whatever it was. It certainly affected my body very, very profoundly.
Mm-hmm. Well, for 20 years.
Because you get raped, and a man gets raped and he doesn't want to talk about it. I didn't even say that word to my wife until about 2011 or 2012.
Mm.
And she said, well, I always knew that's what happened, Whitley, even though you didn't say it. When the doctor said to me, Whitley, you've been raped, the answer was I did not know it, and I was appalled. It was really a very dark moment in my life.
Well, it's quite a transition to go from the realization that you've been raped to saying that this is a communion experience.
Exactly. That transition was orchestrated by Anne, who knew more about the experience, in my opinion, than anyone who's ever lived, even though she didn't apparently have it.
Mm.
I just wonder often what my wife really was, or who she really was. Not to say that she knew herself, but she seemed to come here prepackaged with an extraordinary ability to handle this whole thing, and to handle the incredible contradiction between the initiatory level of it and the numinous level of it.
Mm.
Because what happened to me is an absolutely classic example of an initiatory experience, a physical challenge that is devastating to the ego and sweeps away your whole understanding of the world in a single moment.
Mm.
That happened in the caves where the mystery religions were practiced in the past. And then we forgot. Now it comes back to us in all of its extraordinary power. And we think, oh my God, I'm being raped by aliens, when I am being initiated in some way into another life. And that's why it should be called communion.
Well, and certainly amongst the indigenous people who have their shamanistic initiations, they are all very life-threatening.
They're meant to be, and people sometimes don't. Who was it? Someone from one of the tribal medicine people I've met, and I do know who this is, but out of respect for their wish for anonymity, I'm not going to say this. He said to me, in the old days, you really could get killed by initiation. And the idea was that if you took the challenge of becoming a medicine man and you got yourself killed in the initiatory process, then it meant that you weren't supposed to be a medicine man.
Yeah. Whitley, we're live now. So I should welcome all of the people who have joined us. I'm here with Whitley Strieber, whose newest book is Jesus, A New Vision. And I know this is an interesting time because there's been so much in the news lately about aliens and alien abductions, for which you're well known. But I think it's important, Whitley, that we talk about your newest book, because in many ways, people are responding to it in a really exciting way. I had one viewer who's written in twice already telling me it literally changed their life, that after reading your book, they were able to discover something within their own heart that they didn't know was there before. So I think it might be a nice beginning of our live streaming event if you could talk a little bit about that book, and then we'll be taking questions from our viewers.
Okay, well, I would like to start by saying that the last three books I wrote have a trajectory to them. The one that I published in 2018 or 2017, The Afterlife Revolution, and the trajectory is all about giving permissions. It gives you permission to think that there may be an afterlife that is involved with us and that has a conscious relationship to us, and that aspects of our own dead are actively involved in it. And I did that by describing my experiences with my wife and the many experiences of other people with her. The next book is the same thing, about the contact with the visitors and what they may or may not be, but it gives you permission to think about it at a higher level than us versus the aliens, et cetera, and so forth, and to think about it more as the intrusion of a very powerful and extraordinary presence or aspect of consciousness into our lives that we haven't really experienced in this way before. But I don't think there's ever been a time in our history where we have not experienced it. Now, the third book, Jesus, A New Vision, is essentially saying, what do we do now? Where do we go if we have access to a relationship with our own dead and maybe others in a sort of non-physical realm, and also relationship and very intensely challenging relationship with this other presence that may or may not be a physical presence? We don't even know that. Or fundamental, I mean, it is physical to some extent, that's for sure. There wouldn't be flying saucers flying around that are getting everybody so exercised recently. as if it was something new, as if it started in 2004. Well, anyway, that's another story. But what do we do? What is to be done? And I thought to myself, the trajectory of my own experience, and the books sort of follow it, is from absolute fear and injury, physical injury and anger, through an attempt to accept that fear and integrate it into myself, not to reject it, but to welcome it into myself as part of me, and eventually into a relationship with this presence, with my own dead and with others who are in other levels of reality is completely astonishing to me. But what is my stance toward it? And I thought to myself, the one teacher I know of who seems to have touched this issue of stance most profoundly is Jesus. And by issue of stance, I don't mean that something about a relationship between Jesus and aliens at all, or the presence at all. What I mean is an inner stance. How are you to be in life in such a way that your whole being is discloses itself as something that should be responded to in ways that are enriching to you? And the Jesus teaching is the teaching of the good. But something happened to the Jesus teaching. There's a reason that Christian the Christian world has declined in the past 20 years. 30% of the people, it's 30% fewer people now than it was 20 years ago claiming themselves to be Christian. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that Christian doctrine, is becoming less and less believable in a more rational world. And as it becomes less believable, it also shouts louder and louder. And the more it shouts, the less believable it becomes. So you have these evangelicals crying out with all kinds of bizarre moral stances that have absolutely nothing to do with the Jesus teaching. You have the Catholic Church revealed as a vast labyrinth of all kinds of different corruption, including bizarre sexual corruption and so forth and so on. It is the disenchantment of Christianity. And I thought to myself, the teaching lies behind that disenchantment. The teaching is still valuable. So how do we get to it now without the doctrinal barrier? And the book is showing, it explores the life of Jesus, the teaching, and then shows how the decline and eventual collapse of the Roman Empire led to the replacement of the various sun gods, Apollo and Adonis and the many other sun gods that were present then, with a new sun god, Jesus. They simply, Constantine transformed Jesus the teacher into Jesus the God. He became a Roman god. And since we are almost hardwired by our very natures to believe and to pray, this has continued on long after its lifespan should have been over. So I wanted to kind of get around all of that, return to the teachings and to their power.
Well, I'm certainly under the impression that from the feedback that I've been getting, that it's a very powerful book. And when this viewer wrote to me and said he now understands that Jesus is within him, within his own heart.
Yes.
How did you arrive at that?
Because all of us are ready to live through the good. You know, in many ways, the most powerful document in the Jesus teachings, there are two, the sayings Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary. The Gospel of Mary does not translate the word, does not use the word God. It uses the word the good. In other words, it is a different kind of an abstraction, because it shows you an aim, an inner aim. And the teaching is fascinating in this respect, because in the teaching Gospel of Thomas, Jesus, the teacher, turns everything upside down constantly. He is constantly saying, don't believe me. He takes some of his disciples aside and tells them a secret. And they say, if we told you this secret that he just told us, you would stone him to death. He says, don't pray. Don't do any of it. And in other words, he's challenging you to go down your own path. The Gospel of John was written as an argument against the Gospel of Thomas, and that's why doubting Thomas appears in the Gospel of John. No doubt is no life. You know, my wife Ann said something remarkable. She said many remarkable things after she died. She said many remarkable things beforehand, before that too. But this one was exceptionally important. And I think it's really, really important to remember that she said the human species is too young to have beliefs. What we need are good questions. And Jesus knew that 2,000 years ago, but they stamped it out. And to rediscover that, the incredible richness of the question that is intrinsic to the real Jesus teaching, is a glorious experience. And that's why someone would say, well, I have Jesus in my heart. The reason is the question opened up in this person's heart, because Jesus is that question. It's not faith, it's acceptance of the mystery of one's own being.
I was very impressed many years ago when I interviewed a theologian you may know, Matthew Fox. He was silenced by the Catholic Church, and then he left and became an Episcopalian priest. But he wrote a book called The Coming of the Cosmic Christ, and he basically seemed to suggest that Jesus was a principle that permeated all of nature to the very farthest reaches of the cosmos. And he, I think, identified Jesus as I believe you have, with the light, with the heart, with the sun, with this something that permeates the universe. It's not just a local historical event on a small planet in an obscure galaxy.
It is both. It was a local event on a small planet in an obscure galaxy, as if any galaxy could be considered obscure in this universe where there are so many galaxies. They're all obscure, incredibly enough. You know, something we forget. We see each other and see ourselves teeming down the streets of the world. Do you know we are terribly rare? We're much rarer than stars. We're rarer than galaxies. It's extraordinary. In any case, I was very interested, not so much in looking at the cosmic presence that became this man, but looking at the man who returned to the cosmic presence and what he brought from it and how he returned to it and the aftermath of that, as we decided to, instead of embracing the questions he left behind, to close those questions into the prison of belief.
Hmm.
So I have a little bit different vision of it than Matthew Fox, but not, I don't think it's in opposition at all. It's just a different perspective.
Well, Whitley, we're getting a lot of questions from our live stream audience. Here's one from Megan Close-Dees, who asks, isn't it true that much of our culture's misunderstanding of Christian scripture is due to bad translations and deliberate omissions?
It certainly is. It's very true. This is why I went back and I did my own translations of as much as I could, resuscitating my Greek, which is now as archaic as actual archaic Greek, I'm sorry to say, but in any case, and my Latin, which I'm a little bit more proficient in. But the most extraordinary mistake was made. It wasn't really a mistake. It was a matter of convenience. The committee that was convened to translate the Latin Vulgate into English were not proficient in so much in Greek as they were in Latin. And therefore they used the Latin Vulgate instead of the Greek originals. And that is a terribly important mistake, because a lot of the Greek language was much more subtle than Latin, because by the time Latin came along as an international language, starting in really the first century AD, Greek had already been a language of philosophical exploration for 500 years. And the words in Greek and the tenses, the verb tenses in Greek reflect that, as the Latin ones do not. And just a very, very straightforward and familiar example is the word logos. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, was with God, and the Word was God. Well, in Latin, the word is simply that word. In Greek, logos means all kinds of different things. It has an incredibly rich, layered group of meanings. And when you read it in Greek, you're reading all of those meanings at the same time. And the sentence becomes something much different. The word logos is, in a sense, more mysterious because it has more meanings, and in a sense, less so, because when you just say word, you're left wondering what it actually means. It's sort of lost in a way. And I went back through it as much of it as I could, exploring the language to try to see what the gospel writers were actually trying to say. Because, we always think of, and when you read the gospels, like Mark, Mark it's a very simple gospel. The guy, whoever wrote Mark, whoever the actual author was, had a basic understanding of the language, of the written language, and no more. And when you get to John, you see someone who is practiced in Greek, but trying to write in a way that anybody can understand, is very conscious of wanting to have a large audience for very sophisticated ideas. Paul's Greek is very sophisticated. That gets me to this strangeness of Paul, because who was this really? I mean, here's a thug who's just martyred St. Stephen in Jerusalem and is headed to Damascus to root out more Christians and kill them. He arrives at Damascus. He's blinded by an extraordinary, powerful blast of light that also speaks to him. He's carried in blind, ends up in the house of Ananias. And who was Ananias? For X amount of time, and comes out one of the greatest theological geniuses who ever lived. What happened? So to go back to the original question, if I may, I think that we are really overdue a real translation of the Old Testament and the New Testament, the Old Testament from the Hebrew and the New Testament from the Greek. The unvarnished New Testament, which is an attempt to do that for the New Testament, isn't actually unvarnished. It's an attempt to translate the imagined vernacular meanings of the words into modern vernacular. But we don't know that. We don't know that they were vernacular meanings. Something more needs to be done, and it has to start with people who are not, who do not have an agenda in belief at all. Scholars who are outside of that context completely. And so far that has not happened. We don't actually have any really good translations of the Greek, and they're pretty good. I mean, of the Gospels. I mean, not of the Greek, but of the Gospels in English. And I think that we don't have adequate understanding of Hebrew. I don't think even the best Jewish scholars alive, Hebrew scholars alive today, really understand that extraordinary expression of meaning that is Hebrew and that is contained in the Hebrew letters in the Bible. I think some of those Bible books are among the strangest things that have ever been written, and the most powerful. And we don't have access to that strangeness and that power in the translations.
I have another question for you from Armando Solorzano, who says, what do you think, Whitley, of the Apocryphon of John text? And are the archons that it describes similar to the visitors you write about?
I think that we have a tendency to externalize parts of ourselves that are too powerful and too provocative to accept as human. And we will see these parts of ourselves as something other. And I also think, though, that something other ends up when interacting with us, being forced to interact with us through a kind of screen. And that screen, whatever's there, may not be what we interpret it as through that screen. We call it the archons, we call it the fairy folk, we call it the gods, we call it the visitors, we call it all kinds of things. We don't have any other idea of what's behind that screen, not at all. But the screen is inside us, and it's part of us. And that's why these entities seem so formidable, because they are, in our perception, the parts of us that seem to us to be powerful beyond our own control. How do we ever get past that? as this so-called disclosure process, and it is a disclosure process, I don't want to denigrate it, proceeds, eventually at some point, somebody's going to say, well, what about these aliens? And I mean, are they, yes, they're buzzing around, but are they getting out and going into people's houses? And what's happening? And then we're going to have to confront ourselves in a new way, or fail to successfully build an objective level of communication with them, as indeed we have consistently throughout our whole history. And so I think that the archons are a reflection of a presence that we don't understand and see through our own fear of parts of ourselves that we cannot control.
Here's a related question from somebody who's using the name Domi. Domi is asking, do you think that your reading of Jesus is in accord with Gnostic lore and beliefs? And if so, how?
I didn't hear you. I'm sorry. With what belief?
With Gnostic.
Mastic?
Gnostic, G-N-O-S.
Oh, it isn't in accord with Gnosticism at all. I mean, it's admittedly true that there are scholars who think the sayings Gospel of Thomas is a Gnostic text, but I'm not so sure. I think it's a very, very early text that was used as a basis for Gnosticism. But my approach is not that there are layered deities, positive and negative, engaged with us in some way. I don't actually believe in deities in that sense at all. When I talk about the good and the presence, I'm not talking about deities. I don't think they exist. And I think we've made up all of these gods because we are desperate and alone and mortal and know it. And we have to have we have to have something to hold on to. And what we hold on to is our gods and the efficacy of things like prayer and sacrifice. And it's not real, none of it. So no, I'm not a Gnostic.
Okay, and here is a different question from Pink Chizzy, who asks you, Whitley, about what Pink Chizzy regards as Jesus's latest book in English, A Course in Miracles, and have you read it, or do you have any thoughts about it?
It's been recommended to me many times, and I've gotten through about 200 pages of it. I wouldn't consider it to be a particularly important text.
Okay. We've got an awful lot of questions as well having to do with UFOs and ETs. Here's a question from K-Knight, who says to us, interdimensional beings have performed an operation on me, and my brain now moves. It kind of purrs right to the center. And K-Knight would like to know if you have ever heard of anything like this.
I've heard of many unusual perceptions, and I have had many unusual perceptions and experiences that are grounded in some way in reality. They are real. What is behind them, though, is an entirely different and so far unanswered question. What's happening to mankind right now, at least in certain parts of the world, is that we have used up our ability to believe our prior definitions of the meaning of this presence. And we are in the process of redefining it. We don't believe in fairy folk anymore. We don't believe in sylphs and gods or any of those things anymore. So we have replaced them with interdimensional beings and aliens from other planets and so forth and so on. But this presence that's quite real and is outside of us to a great extent still hasn't been addressed in an objective manner. So my answer is this: I don't know what happened to you. I don't think you do either. And it's not meant as a criticism at all. It's meant as a suggestion that you can be free of the assumptions about it that you hold. And it may disclose it may disclose a new meaning for you, and a richer one, if you open your mind to what Anne said, which I think is just seminal, that the species is simply too young to have beliefs. We need good questions. Your brain is asking you a fabulously good question.
Very good. Here's a comment from Jim Getton. He says that your explanation of the relationship between Mary Magdalene and Jesus was an epiphany. It made him change his complete approach to the feminine and to women. And he wants you to know that. And I guess for the benefit of our viewers, maybe you could amplify a bit on this relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene.
Well, I could amplify it at length, but I won't go that long. From the beginning, both the Jewish world and the Greek world had a profound social and cultural failure in that way they began to view women. In Jesus, A New Vision, one of the first things I talk about is the catastrophe of Genesis, when essentially what happened was that these were people who lived short, difficult lives, but loved each other as much as we do each other, and were as real to each other as we are. But they were affected by nature in ways that they could not even begin to understand. They didn't know what nature was. They didn't know what their own bodies were. They didn't know how their bodies functioned. They didn't know what disease was. They didn't know what climate was. And they personalized it all, saying, all of this is happening to us. If my house was struck by lightning, a god did it because I was evil. And they decided somewhere along the line that pleasure must be something that God dislikes and that resents us when we have pleasure. And therefore, the male decided to dominate the female. And you have this catastrophic decision made that underlies our whole culture still to this day, that woman was somehow responsible for some kind of rejection by deity, and that the human being is marked by a kind of basic sin, which is to say, the human being discovered his own humanity and their own humanity, and therefore is no longer beloved of the gods. In a world where gods don't exist, though, that takes on an entirely different meaning. And I think that the part in my book about the marriage feast at Cana and the actual energetic sense that's been stripped out of the Gospels because of this fear of women and of pleasure. It can return because you begin to realize that Jesus, a lot of words have been put into Jesus's mouth, but the words that have been taken out of Jesus's mouth are his words about women, undoubtedly. And the fact that the marriage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene probably is reflected in the marriage feast in Cana has been edited out of it. And you can see when you read my book what's missing and what is intentionally been removed. It's very clear. And what has been removed is that this is not only a mystical wedding, if you will, an alchemical wedding even, it is also an actual wedding between a man and a woman who went on to jointly preach a new teaching to the world, which is fundamentally based in equality at every single level. So I'm glad that you had that reaction to it. We all need this epiphany. It is essential to the future of the species. We've spent most of the history of this species denying the value of of half of its minds. And these minds are marvelous. The feminine has so much to offer that we will not hear. Not even, well, I could go on, but no, that's enough.
Oh, okay. That was very eloquent, and I wholeheartedly agree with that sentiment. We have a question from Foreshore who asks Whitley, when was the last time and now Foreshore says you were visited by aliens, and I know because we just discussed it that you don't use the word aliens.
No. The last time was 3 o'clock this morning. I was waked up, as I often am, by being someone blowing in my face with a, and woke me right up. I've been, ever since my wife died, a few weeks after she died, someone began to engage with me at that hour and began to want me to do an exercise Anne and I learned in the Gurdjieff work called the sensing exercise, which the visitors, whatever they are, revised it somewhat after. So what I do is a little bit different from what is done in the Gurdjieff work, but I'm still very active in the work. I got up and I did this exercise, and at 3 and finished about 3:35, I guess. Went back to sleep and proceeded to have what seemed to be an interaction with Anne so vivid that it felt like she had come back to life. And I said to her, Anne, if you've actually come back to life, then shouldn't we tell other people? And she looked at me out of the corner of her eyes in this very enigmatic way. And in the morning when I thought about this, I thought to myself, boy, did I touch the mystery this morning. So my engagement with the presence most recently was this morning at 3 a.m. And I know that doesn't answer your question about aliens, but until I have been shown that aliens are aliens, I am going to agree with John and be a doubting Thomas. But that doesn't mean I don't think they are here. Don't draw conclusions. Don't take those leaps. The mind is so automatically leaps from one belief to another. The truth of the matter is, it's a question that hasn't been answered. And the whole folklore of aliens from different planets and different species with different objectives and et cetera and so forth, it's a folklore. Now, that said, I have physically seen and interacted with entities that appeared to be aliens of 3 entirely different kinds in the course of my life, including one interaction with 2 different kinds and a human being in the middle of Stapleton Airport, in the old Denver airport. So, you know, I'm walking a tightrope on purpose, and I would like to fall, but I don't intend to. I'm getting used to the tightrope. And on this tightrope, you get to see it all. You get to see all of the possibilities. And that's what I think we need right now.
Well, you have a beautiful way of putting these things. Here's a related question from Mr. Black, or M.R. Black, I'm not quite sure which, who asked, did you ever encounter any alien belief systems?
I have been struggling with human belief systems for a long time, and to an extent against them. And I don't know if there are aliens who have belief systems. I'm going to be very, in a sense, disappointed, because to me, the word belief is detached from fact. And it is, I believe this, but not that I have factual proof of it. And in fact, I can easily show you that you can't have a belief system, and here's how. There was a philosopher, in fact still is, as far as I know, he's still very much alive, called Edmund Gettier, who in 1963 proposed a problem which shows that we can't actually have a true belief. And this is, I'll express this very simply in the context of something that's known as the cow problem. A farmer has a cow that he's concerned about. Is the cow ill or not? So he separates the cow into a separate field. In this field, there is a little hollow and a tree, but otherwise the field's completely empty. So when he's working in his barn, he can glance into the field at any time and see the cow. Chance intervenes. The cow wanders into the hollow. He can't see the cow now that's in the hollow. And a piece of black and white paper, the cow is a Holstein, so it's black and white, blows into the field and gets caught under the tree. The cow, at this point, is absolutely fine. The farmer looks into the field and he sees the black and white paper in the distance under the tree and concludes that the cow is fine. The farmer is both right and wrong at the same time. He is right. The cow is fine. He is wrong. He has not seen the cow. He has seen a piece of paper under a tree. I would submit to you that this is why beliefs are completely pointless. There's no reason to have a belief at all. In fact, what we have is a mystery, and the mystery is us.
Well, we've got a viewer here who thinks that we do have belief systems. You and I both, Whitley. Von Rensburg's Gesicht says, are Strieber and Mishlove aware of their liberal moral instincts after hate, whoever hate is, H-A-I-D-T, that unconsciously steer their philosophical reflections in one direction?
I'm not interested in politics. Next question.
Okay. Well, it's kind of a related question. The next one is, why are we talking about people who lived 2,000 years ago when the world is on the brink of disaster right now?
It's because we haven't been talking about people who lived 2,000 years ago that the world is on the brink of disaster right now. Specifically, we abandoned the teachings that would have helped us be more of a human community instead of the morass of hostility and political gibberish that exists now. We will go through an extinction event. We are going through it, and we're going to see the full extent of it unless a miracle occurs. And someone has to discover something truly extraordinary, or if there are aliens here, they have to intervene. And if that doesn't happen, neither of those things happen, then we will experience the full extent of the extinction event. And I can be fairly specific about when it is going to rise to the surface to the extent that it's going to make us all feel desperate. The Gulf Stream, as I pointed out in my book, Superstorm, written with Art Bell, and as was pointed out to me in the dialogue that I published as The Key some years before that, the Gulf Stream is indeed slowing down, just as it was predicted it would. And when it stops, there is going to be a fundamental change in the whole climate regime of the planet Earth. The Gulf Stream and the jet stream, in atmospheric jet stream, the currents in the ocean, in the currents in the air, are intimately connected with one another. And among other things, Europe will suddenly get much colder and have a completely different climate regime. We don't really know precisely what will happen over North America and Asia, but the world will very abruptly change its climate regime permanently, and then we'll have to live with it. And that will happen. There will be many other things that happen along those lines as well. Planet Earth has a habit of changing its rules, the rules of nature from time to time. And I'm not personalizing this, it simply happens. When the dinosaurs were eliminated, it was because an asteroid, a huge asteroid, hit off the coast of the Yucatan and annihilated everything that wasn't able to adapt to what became very rapidly an appallingly difficult climate regime. As recently as 536 BC, AD, a massive volcanic eruption that probably took place in Alaska, though some scientists think it took place in Iceland, caused the planet to enter a phase of darkness for 18 months, during which time agriculture was disrupted. There followed then a plague known as the Plague of Cyprian that depopulated the Roman Empire to the extent that the Western Roman Empire had already collapsed. The emperor in Constantinople had to send soldiers out into the countryside to force people to move into the city to repopulate it. If that happened today, a similar volcanic eruption, this civilization would end. Another thing that happened more recently was the Carrington event in, I believe, 1858, if I recall correctly. A tremendous solar explosion of a kind that we have fairly frequently from our sun, that caused all of the electronic devices on the planet then, which consisted entirely of telegraphic machines, to explode. Now, that sounds fairly undramatic. I mean, obviously it wasn't to the people who were trying to use the telegraphs at the time. But if that happened today, it would end most of our satellite communications and most of our electronic infrastructure. There have been studies of this. I wrote about them in an ebook I wrote some years ago called Solar Flares, that showed that after 30 years after such an event, the population of the United States would have declined by 90%. And that event is simply waiting to happen. We live at, who was it? John Cheever said it wonderfully in one of his short stories. of a little town. It lives, it hangs by a thread, but it hangs by its thread in the evening light. This is where we are.
Well, I think you began to answer that question.
And I went off the track. I know that.
No. I think it was a wonderful answer, but you started, if I recall, by saying the reason we're in so much trouble now is because we're not paying enough attention to the people.
Sure, we're not. I'll tell you exactly what. I'll just let me summarize it in a slightly different way. Jesus came along with an idea of community, with an idea of the equality of everyone and the value of everyone. He walked into a world in which only certain people had significance and value. The emperor became a god when he died, but the average man's death didn't matter to anyone at all except the people around him, or perhaps those who had loved him. The individual was unimportant in that world. The Hellenistic philosophers were just beginning to change this at a higher level. In other words, the experiment of democracy had happened in Athens for a short time, but it was never the common man at the bottom of the heap. And Jesus suddenly said, no, the common man at the bottom of the heap has equal value. Now, this gave rise to community. There was a document apparently created in the first century AD called the Didache, which is basically a set of rules of community. And that community is what's the collapse of the Roman Empire with plague after plague. That community survived. Nowadays, we have in the United States, for example, two political parties. One is a party of community, one is a party of liberty. And they fantastically have divided themselves into two opposing camps, which I regard as insanity. Because in fact, the party of community has answers at certain times and the party of liberty at other times. And a perfect example is the 1920s. We got through the Spanish flu, and the party of liberty gained power as it should have. And we had a wonderful expression of prosperity in the United States because the party of liberty was saying, party of community, with all of your plans and your socialism and whatever, stay away. Let us be free. Let us go out and do our thing. And that worked up to a point. Then the Federal Reserve made a mistake and tried to interfere, and the whole thing collapsed. People were left starving, and the party of community was needed again. And it came forward, and we had the New Deal and Roosevelt, who saved the country from the Depression and saved many. But now we have a situation where it's either my way or the highway. The party of community says, if we get power, then the party of liberty is absolutely ridiculous. They have no business even existing. The party of liberty keeps trying to push the party of community aside. It's ludicrous. It's a failure of imagination. So that man back there 2,000 years ago has a whole lot to say, because over the course of that history, as the Roman Empire imploded, those Christian communities became the only thing that remained coherent. And Constantine, the emperor, he saw this, and he decided that he would escalate the Christian spirit of community into the whole empire by turning Jesus into a god and saying that you have to believe in this God and you have to live by his instructions as to how a community should work. The result of this was that in the plagues that followed that, Constantine's life, the Christians, and in fact the ones that preceded it too, the Christians were always the ones who they would go out and they would take people in off the streets. They would give them water. They would do anything to help them. There were groups of Christians that were called parabolani, that is to say, risk takers, and they would help people even often at the cost of their own lives, because remember, they had no idea what contagion was and just only the most primitive ideas of sanitation. Now, what happened though is it kept on, and it became so virulent that the Christians decided not only that the pagan gods had abandoned the Roman Empire, but they were actively attacking it. And the Parabolani they changed from a group of hospitallers into a kind of paramilitary group that were going out and wrecking the temples and the statuary and killing the non-Christians, and pulling down their buildings, etc., and so forth. In fact, what happened between about 230 and 530 AD was the greatest revolution in human history. It just isn't called that, but that's what it was. And it happened because this idea of community became perverted by fear. Now, so if we go back to the doctrine that were promulgated by Constantine and his bishops, we don't succeed. But if we go back to the ideas that Jesus brought forth as to how to have a community, it becomes very relevant to the world we will be facing very soon.
It sounds like you're suggesting that there's no avoiding these extinction events.
No, well, I think personally that it's gone too far and that we can't avoid it. Now, there's always the possibility of a technological intervention that succeeds. I won't deny that. But at the moment, I just don't see one on the horizon. We have these crazy ideas like Bill Gates promulgated that we fill the upper atmosphere with reflective particles. But you talk about the danger of unintended consequences. We do not have modeling deep enough to know what that would actually do in the long run. We could end up extinguishing ourselves for other reasons than global warming if we weren't careful. The only thing I can think of now, but I'm not a scientist, is some kind of carbon remediation or carbon capture that would reestablish the atmosphere or reduce the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere fast enough to make a difference. But I don't think that can happen. It might be, though. I would never underestimate the human ability to survive. After all, we went into the last ice age naked and running and jumping through trees, and came out of it clothed and organized in communities and carrying stone spears. So we did it once. Maybe we can do it again.
I might just mention parenthetically, I recently conducted an interview, has yet to be released. It'll be released on Friday, with a fellow named Kenneth Pelletier, an old friend of mine who is a medical doctor. And I asked him about this, and he said to his knowledge that there's a solution for every single problem we're facing. He said most of them are underfunded and they're small groups. He said if you look around, you will see solutions. But I suppose since they are underfunded, we don't know, as you point out, the unintended consequences that any of them might have.
Right. And some of them, like the one I pointed out, cannot be, the consequences cannot be completely determined. I think that, I don't necessarily think that the human species is going to become extinct. But I think that the human population is going to become a lot smaller, and that there's going to be a great deal of difficulty associated with that in the form of wars and forced migration and so forth. It's going to be a repeat on a larger scale of what happened to the Romans. And what happened to them, I mean, the Roman Empire, the collapse of the Roman Empire started in about 150 AD. They didn't know it at the time, but because they didn't understand climate, their entire worldview was revolved around their gods and what the gods were doing. Excuse me. Prior to that time, there was something that climatologists now think of as the Roman climate optimum, where the Mediterranean basin was well watered. It was well, you were getting plenty of rain all around the Mediterranean basin, and there was lots of successful farming going on. The Romans figured out some military techniques that enabled them to conquer the entire basin. And then they built roads and sea lanes and so forth. The population began to go into flux in this situation. Then comes a change in the sun. The sun began to get brighter, to emit more energy. And we know this because we can examine stalactites in caves in Scotland that have a record in their calcification of how much solar output there would have been based on the amount of rainfall that was being recorded in that area at the time. And so suddenly things began to dry up in the Roman world. Two things happened. One is people began to be able to eat less because there was less food around. Then the next thing you know, because their immune systems are challenged, all of that movement means that people are exposed to diseases that they've never experienced before while their immune systems are weak. We have the first plague. We have the Antonine plague during the time of Marcus Aurelius. Then more plagues come. Then, however, this change in the climate is also affecting the rest of the world. In Central Asia, the Huns get into a situation where they are, their forage is drying up. I'm afraid I might be boring.
Well, I've got another question here from Facade, who says, can you talk about original sin? What is the original sin of our times as a species?
I don't think there's any such thing as original sin. There's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with us. In fact, we are in this situation not because of something that we did, but because of what we are. I'll tell you what we are. We are a species with a high degree of intelligence, excellent memories, no sexual seasonality, no hair, and big genitals right on the fronts of our bodies. Now, what does that add up to? It adds up to a lot of sex and a lot of babies. And we have overpopulated the planet, not because of something we did, but because of what we are. Now, if there have been aliens around here playing with us, with our design, and they've designed us, then they have committed an original sin. We are innocent. What is happening only for one reason: overpopulation. And the rapid expansion of population is essentially we have almost no chance of getting ahead of the rapid expansion of population with technology that would enable us to rebalance the planetary ecosystem in such a way that it could accommodate this huge number of people. I think that our chances of we would have had to start sometime in the 18th century And in the 18th century, it was only Thomas Malthus who realized what would happen, but nobody could understand what in the world to do about it. And nobody did anything about it, and nobody could have. And I'm not suggesting there should have been some kind of population control at all. We don't know what we might have done. Now we can think of carbon remediation. We can think of a lot of things. We can think that a lot of us have become addicted to material goods, and we can think of maybe backing off from that. We can think that what we call prosperity is actually connected in some way to a very deep death wish that emerges out of excessive population density. When we overpopulate a rat maze, they turn into monsters and they begin to attack each other without reason and murder each other. And you know, you're stewing in your own juices, and we are stewing in our own juices. It's not our fault.
Let me just mention to our viewers, it's 5 after the hour now, and we're going to continue for another 25 minutes to the bottom of the hour. Here's a question from Dragon Rising 11, who asks, Whitley, have you ever been able to connect directly in your meditations with the Christ energy?
Well, since I think that Christ was invented by Constantine, the answer is no. Have I got a relationship with Jesus? The answer is I don't know. I don't know if I have any relationships with anything outside of myself. As I spoke earlier, it does appear to be that way. And I would say that if you ask me, I would think I have a relationship with my wife. Frankly, I think I have a relationship with entities that could be aliens that I don't understand, that no one understands yet, I don't think. And that certainly the people on the inside don't understand. If the whistleblowers and so forth, with their stories of various alien races, lizard people and whatnot, are a reflection of what they think on the inside, then they are pouring from the empty into the void, as Didache used to say. But I think that what we have here is a question that if we try to run to answers, we will fail. It's a question we have to entertain in a new way. When you say the Christ energy, I know what you're talking about, and so do you. A lot of us do, because we felt that sense of a large sacredness that has something to do with us. But beyond that, isn't it an extraordinary mystery, and a greater mystery even that we can perceive it?
I remember, Whitley, in our previous conversation, we had an open-ended conversation, and we talked then about your manuscript that hadn't yet been published. And you kept going back to the phenomenon of light, this overwhelming light that Paul experienced and Moses experienced, and many great spiritual teachers, Zarathustra, experienced this light. And you began posing the question, what is this light that has affected not just Christianity, but other religions all around the world?
Our cultures have been touched by light. Zarathustra was walking in the forest, wandering in the, I guess, I don't know whether it was a forest or a desert at the time in Persia where he lived. It was a very long time ago. But looking for enlightenment, looking for some truth. And he found it in that this Lord of Light appeared and gave him what became Zoroastrianism, his religion. Um, uh, uh, Akhenaten saw the sun as a living being, something that is now being re-entertained in new ways. Jesus in the tomb, as the Shroud of Turin so eloquently shows, and forget the 1988 debunking of it, that is not reality, emerged out of it as a transformed entity of light, something that is perhaps inherent in every human body in some way. Moses saw the burning bush. Paul was blinded and then enlightened by the light, blinded to his past and then enlightened by the light, by this light. There is a living light of some kind. It's living. It is more than conscious, in the sense that we have consciousness, which is essentially a way of referring to ourselves that gives meaning, gives us a kind of meaning. This is something else, but it's real and it's here. And every single incident has had the same message. There is only one God. Now, who is that? Is it the God of Akhenaten, of Constantine, of Augustus, Moses? Who is it? Who is it outside of us? This being of light, this entity of light, this presence of light. Light is life.
That's very profound. Once again, Whitley, you have a beautiful way with words, I have to say. Since we have just 20 minutes left, we've had a lot of questions about UFOs. And so I want to switch gears again.
Sure.
People are asking if you have an opinion about the process of the government revelations. There seems to be a constant trickle of information coming from the government now about UFOs, and they'd like to know what do you know about it? What do you think about that?
Well, I've been involved with people in that world for a long time, obviously. I think that they're trying to channel this in such a way. I mean, channel it not psychically, but channel it culturally and socially in such a way that we basically look at what they have and have some understanding of, which is the videos that they have collected of unknown objects or unknown presences, phenomena moving around in the skies. I don't say flying because they're not flying, they're moving around in the skies. They don't have any flight characteristics. They have motion characteristics. And the metamaterials that have been gathered, and I say metamaterials because they're materials that can't be made on Earth, that were gathered at various sites over the late 40s and 50s. And I've got some of that metamaterial here in this office, in fact. And what it is a fragment of material which is layered bismuth and magnesium. We studied it at Southwest Research years ago, unofficially, under the aegis of the director of materials science at that time, William Mallow, and found that the layers have nothing between them. There's nothing causing them to adhere to each other, but it is a very solid little piece of material. You can't do anything to it. So what in the world is it? That is not known. I have not had it studied out of my office. I had it out of my office in years. And the reason is that some of the other materials I had that were studied at Southwest disappeared. And I don't know who has them, and I don't intend to give this to a laboratory and find out that I get a report back that it was just a piece of industrial slag, and then anyway, they've lost it. I'm not willing to accept that anymore. So what happens though is what is concerning to me when people realize that these disclosures mean that there is someone else here from another world, whether it's another physical world or some other place in time or another dimension or whatever it may be. We don't know the answers to those questions yet. But we do know that there is a large body of people, me included, who have been affected by it physically. I was physically affected by this. I was injured. There's no question in my mind that it happened physically. What happens is another entirely different question. Being a real skeptic, you have to walk a tightrope, and I walked that tightrope very carefully. On the one hand, I'm saying we don't have answers. On the other hand, I'm saying the questions are damn real, because I was raped on the night of December the 26th, 1985, and it was 20 years of struggle physically to get to the point where I was no longer in pain from the scarring that occurred. And during that entire time, I became the rectal probe man, ha ha ha, and was laughed at again and again and again in the public space for being raped. Something is wrong there. Now, what happens when the public goes back over that and thinks, well, wait a minute, they're telling us these things that flying around in the sky are real? What about the people? And I'm very much afraid that they haven't thought that out, or that they have some method that they have devised that they hope to throw the people under the bus, to say that it's all a fantasy. These people are all crazy. Well, I'll tell you right now, the close encounter witnesses and the abductees are not crazy. Something is here, and it is doing something to us. It is not just flying around in the sky. So the disclosure process, I think, as far as it goes, it's fine so far, but I definitely think there is a possibility that it's going to spin way out of control, and I don't think it's necessarily going to be good for the close encounter witnesses.
In other words, it sounds like what you're saying is they're willing to disclose so much, and only then they want to stop it.
Then they want to stop, and I'm telling them, I know a lot of them, I'm telling them, it's not going to stop. You can't do that. You can't control the narrative, not this narrative. This narrative is huge. You understand, they're saying someone from another world is here. This is enormous at every single level. It means that we have to, among other things, go and re-examine our whole history in a new way, because we have had gods, demons, fairy folks, sylphs, all kinds of things in our past. What exactly was Ezekiel's wheel? Looks to me like it was some kind of a technological object that he couldn't understand. And the material in the Hindu literature of a war in space, what does that actually mean? Was it all dreamed up or not? I don't think so. I think we have to go back and look at it all over again. And the things that we don't understand, the fortress at Sacsayhuaman in Peru, the platform at Baalbek, the pyramids, the strange artificial islands built of gigantic basalt logs in the Carolinas known as Nan Madol, and many other things on this planet that we don't understand. We have to say to ourselves, as a culture and in archaeology, as scientists, we actually don't understand. The explanation that the Roman engineers built the platform at Baalbek cannot be true. There is a mystery to not only the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, but to not only to how it was built, but what it was for. The Incas didn't know when they tried to show Pizarro how they built it. Hundreds of people were killed trying to drag stones up the cliffs. We have to re-examine our whole history. We have to re-examine our culture. There is a tremendous opportunity for the academic world to do those things. There is a tremendous opportunity for archaeology. There is a tremendous opportunity in any number of different sciences, including biology, because if someone's here from another world, are we designed then? Is that why we're so different from all of the other species on this planet? And therefore, why in the world were we designed to fail? Because we are built to fail. We are built to overpopulate, and we are built to fail. What is going on here? All of that has to be re-examined, and it's going to be terribly difficult because the sciences, through exquisitely powerful social engineering, coming from what level I do not know, I would doubt that it's any human level, have been hoodwinked into seeing the world in ways that are not real. The physicalists and the materialists are wrong. It's not enough. There's more. And we know that now. We know that now. So where do we go from here? A massive leap of consciousness is necessary, both if we are going to understand ourselves, our world, and the truth of being what it is to be human, and what is going to happen to us and has happened to us in the past. I will tell you this. Once some of the visitors in one of these strange experiences I've had were kneeling before me. And I couldn't understand this. And the answer, when I asked, the answer came in my head, because you are human. What do you make of that? Who are you? Who am I? Who are any of us? Jeffrey.
Well, I'm very touched with the idea that being human puts us in a very special predicament. Maybe
exactly, it's a predicament for sure.
Maybe a predicament worth envying. Here's another question from Francesca Ferraro, a spiritual medium, who asks, is your work being interfered with? In fact, she says still being interfered with, as if she's already heard you discuss this. Are they still trying to shut you down? I didn't know that they were. If that.
Oh, sure. Certainly there were, many attempts. I mean, there's a reason. There's a reason why. For example, I'll give you a perfect example. I had a friend who was a brilliant man, an expert in things like alchemy and spiritual practice, an expert in conspiracy theories and so forth. And I suspect him of having some kind of locomotion that connected him with the CIA. The reason is this. When I knew Norman Mailer very vaguely, our sons were friends. And when he was writing his book about the CIA, his novel, he had a researcher. And he told me that this researcher was actually a CIA agent. He was very proud of that. And so his book was going to be, a real insight into the inner workings of the intelligence community, in which it probably is. I'm not sure. In any case, that researcher is the same person I'm talking about. And about a year and a half ago, after 20 years of close friendship, he suddenly ceased to talk to me. And he is part of a pattern of people connected with the inside of this thing who are closing me off right now. and have been closing me off for a while and ceasing to interact with me. None of the people on TTSA, for example, will interview on Dreamland on my show, and I can understand their reticence. Actually, it doesn't. I don't think there's any conspiracy there. Their reticence is they don't know how to be involved with. They don't want to be asked questions about abductions, and I understand them perfectly. I think they're going to be, whether they want to or not, but obviously not by me if they want to interview with me. But and I had a run-in with a Senate select committee on intelligence back in the 90s, where they were threatening to subpoena me because of I know a lot about the Roswell incident because one of my uncles was involved in it. And General Arthur Exon, who was also involved in it as a colonel, the family knew a lot about it. And they were after me because I wrote a book called Majestic, which takes a lot of the factual material and turns it into fiction. And they gave me a lot of trouble. And I would assume they're going to do it more. I don't think that will go away. As long as they don't understand and they're afraid, and I'm noisy and outspoken, I'm going to have trouble. End of story.
It sounds, and we only have 5 minutes left, but it does sound like you're not being actively interfered with. They haven't shut down your websites or your broadcasts. They may avoid you. They may disagree with you.
Well, right. Yeah. It's not like it used to be. It's not nearly as active as it was. And it could become again, as far as I know. But I've taken a lot of steps to protect my information. And as far as access is concerned, that could be interrupted at any time, I would assume. It's not provocative now. Let me say that. It isn't so provocative now. And also a lot of the people who might have thought would be provocative have either gone silent or they're very friendly. Like I know people on the inside, some of them very close to me personally as friends. And then when I say on the inside, they have security clearances. I don't know what lies behind the security clearances. I just know they have them. Yeah. And if anything, they're warmer and more forthcoming than they ever have been, on the one hand. On the other hand, less willing than ever before to interact with me in any public way.
I can imagine that they feel like they have to walk a tightrope themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Whitley, we have 3 minutes left now in our live stream. We've had a very good showing. I see that there have been nearly 2,000 people watching this conversation and posting questions. I'm sorry we haven't gotten to everybody's question, but of course the video will be up. It'll be archived. I want to let our viewers know as well, we publish a weekly newsletter at New Thinking Allowed, and viewers can subscribe for free at the New Thinking Allowed, ALLOWED, Foundation website, newthinkingallowed.org. So in the remaining minutes that we have, Whitley, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share with our viewers?
Yes. I think the simplest thing to do is to think about a miracle. Wherever it came from, we don't know. Exactly what its full dimensions are, we don't know. But we do know one thing about it, and we know it very well. We are that miracle. And believe me, our skies wouldn't be full of strange little things darting around in our bedrooms full of peculiar beings and the veil between the living and the dead wouldn't be dropping as it in fact is. And the human species on its journey now would not be as it is if this was not a time of great promise right along with the danger. The little fish swam comfortably in the waters of Pisces for 2,000 years. Now Aquarius is pouring those waters out, and we're going to end up on dry land. Watch out, mankind is being born. And that is going to be noisy and exciting. And it is the reason all of those strange entities are here. They are the midwives.
Well, Whitley Strieber, what a pleasure to be with you once again. It's always, for me personally, a joyous experience. So I want to thank
you. It's always for me too, Jeffrey, being with you, a joyous experience.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted, and I look forward to many more conversations with you in the future, Whitley. Thank you so much for being with me. And for those of you who have been watching or listening, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much for listening to this